Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Invading Russian forces pressed deep into Ukraine as deadly battles reached the outskirts of Kiev, and the West responded with punishing sanctions. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow was ready for talks if Ukraine's military surrendered, as he insisted that invading forces were looking to free the country from oppression. And in different parts of the world, protesters turned out on public squares and outside embassies, Russian embassies in cities from different parts of the world to denounce the invasion of Ukraine. First in our news, invading Russian forces pressed deep into Ukraine as deadly battles reached the outskirts of Kiev, and the West responded with punishing sanctions. Take a look. Now, Russia has attacked Ukraine with airstrikes, missiles, and ground troops. Russian missiles and shelling rained down on Ukrainian cities after President Putin unleashed a full-scale ground invasion and air assault, forcing civilians to shelter on metro systems, with 100,000 people now displaced, according to the UN. Across Ukraine, at least 137 heroes were killed after the first day of fighting. That is according to President Volodymyr Zelensky, calling up conscripts and reservists nationwide to fight in a general mobilization. Let's listen in.
За наявною у нас інформацією, ворог позначив мене як ціль номер 1, мою родину як ціль номер 2. Вони хочуть знищити Україну політично, знищивши главу держави. Маємо інформацію про те, що у Київ зайшли диверсійні групи ворога. Тому я дуже прошу киян, будьте уважними, дотримуйтесь правил комендантської години. Я залишаюсь в урядовому кварталі разом з усіма, хто необхідний для роботи центральної влади.
Наразі підтверджена загибель декількох десятків українських військовослужбовців. Це переважно за рахунок повітряних ударів зранку, повітряних і ракетних. Я попередньо заявив, що перший удар провалився. Це, звісно, звучить, особливо для цивільних людей, на фоні таких втрат в декілька десятків людей не дуже, але, повірте, вони розраховували набагато більше.
Я никогда не думала, что такое может быть. Я никогда не думала, что это действительно случится в этой жизни. Мы писали стихи про войну. Я сама режиссер, хореограф, педагог в свое время. Мы учили историю, но никогда не думали, что это будет на нашей земле.
Был обстрел, там воинская часть. Конечно.
Слышали, видели?
Ну, не видеть не видел, но сильные стены. Ну, стекла не подбились, но стены сильно.
Ну, и вы сразу вот,
да, собрали чемодан, да. У меня брат есть родной, мы собираемся, уезжаем.
Как вы думаете, кто?
Now, across Ukraine, at least 68 people were already killed, including both soldiers and civilians, according to an AFP tally from Ukrainian official sources. Moscow's forces seized a key strategic air base near Kiev, as well as the scene of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, a vast area still heavily contaminated with radioactive material. Zelensky called the attack on Chernobyl a declaration of war on all of Europe, while 18 people were killed at a military base near the Black Sea port of Odessa in the deadliest single strike reported by Kiev. Now, Zelensky said there was now a new Iron Curtain between Russia and the rest of the world, like in the Cold War, adding in a later speech that his nation had been left alone. Let's listen in.
Але є й друге. Ми залишаємось наодинці у захисті нашої держави. Хто готовий воювати разом з нами? Чесно, не бачу таких. Хто готовий дати Україні гарантію вступу до НАТО? Чесно, всі бояться.
And while the United States moved to impose sanctions on Russian elites and banks, it stressed that American forces would not fight in Ukraine. NATO said it had activated defense plans for allied countries, but NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said there was no plan to send alliance forces into Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden announced severe economic sanctions to make President Vladimir Putin a pariah for invading Ukraine. Arlene Ocampo reports from Washington, D.C.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday announces severe new sanctions on Russia, including freezing assets of major banks and cutting off high-tech exports. This is in response to what the White House called an unprovoked and unjustified attack of Ukraine by Russia.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies.
Biden emphasizes that Russian President Vladimir Putin would feel the consequences of the Ukraine invasion.
We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself. Cut it off from the U.S. financial system.
The sanctions aim at crippling Russia's banking system.
And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen.
And in coordination with other countries, Russia's tech industry is also being targeted.
Between our actions and those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It'll strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It'll hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete economically. And it will be a major hit to Putin's long-term strategic ambitions. And we're preparing to do more. Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage.
The White House says President Biden held a phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, soon after explosions were heard in multiple parts of the country, which is sandwiched between Russia and NATO member Poland. Arlene Ocampo, Eagle News, Washington, D.C.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow was ready for talks if Ukraine's military surrendered, as he insisted that invading forces were looking to free the country from oppression. Russian President Vladimir Putin took the decision to conduct a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine so that, freed from oppression, Ukrainians themselves could freely determine their future, according to Lavrov at a press conference in Moscow. The comment suggested that Moscow intends to overthrow the Ukrainian authorities with its invasion. Lavrov said Moscow was ready for talks with Kiev if the army surrenders. He also said the aim of Putin's operation was openly declared demilitarization and denazification. Lavrov said that nobody intends to occupy Ukraine, and he denied Ukrainian claims that Russian forces had hit civilian infrastructure, despite widespread evidence of residential areas being damaged. The Ukrainian army said that Russian forces were approaching Kiev from north and northeast. Meanwhile, Japan will impose sanctions on Russia, targeting semiconductor exports and financial institutions. That, according to the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, after G7 leaders agreed to punish Moscow economically for invading Ukraine. Take a look.
資産凍結と査証発給停止によるロシアの個人団体などへの制裁。2つ目として、ロシアの金融機関を対象とする資産凍結といった金融分野での制裁、 3つ目として、ロシアの軍事関連団体に対する輸出、国際的な合意に基づく規制リスト品目や半導体など汎用品のロシア向け輸出に関する制裁の3分野における措置を速やかに実施をいたします。
Prime Minister Kishida did not detail the scale of the sanctions or which individuals and institutions would be targeted, though local media said Bank Rossiya, Promsia's Bank, and Russia's Economic Development Bank, VEB, would be hit. Semiconductors are essential components in products from cars to gaming consoles and are in short supply worldwide. On Wednesday, Tokyo announced a ban on the issuing and trade of Russian government bonds in Japan after Moscow ordered troops into two separatist-controlled Ukrainian regions. Now, Britain too imposed a biting package of sanctions on Russia that Prime Minister Boris Johnson said is the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions that Moscow has ever seen. Let's listen in.
With new financial measures, we're taking new powers to target Russian finance, in addition to the banks we've already sanctioned this week. Today, in concert with the United States, we are imposing a full asset freeze on VTB. More broadly, these powers will enable us totally to exclude Russian banks from the UK financial system, which is, of course, by far the largest in Europe, stopping them from accessing sterling and clearing payments through the UK. Overall, we'll be imposing asset freezes on more than 100 new entities and individuals, on top of the hundreds that we've already announced. This includes all the major manufacturers that support Putin's war machine. Furthermore, we are also banning Aeroflot from the UK.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, is telling reporters that Russia has attacked hospitals in Ukraine and a fight is ongoing for control of the Chernobyl nuclear station, as well as launching missiles from Belarus. Let's listen in.
No mistake. It's not a military operation or whatever it was called yesterday in Donetsk or Lugansk. It's a war against Ukraine. The aggressor state also used the territory of Belarus to launch an attack. They tried to cross the state border with tanks, armored personnel, and military vehicles, and 4 ballistic missiles have been launched towards Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. According to the latest data, they also attacked some of the hospitals. That was just the information that was out from the Minister of Health. And they also made an attempt to seize the Chernobyl nuclear power station. Here, I know that as of this morning, we had 40 Ukrainian servicemen and dozens of civilians killed. And we had several dozens of Ukrainians also wounded. But again, I do not have the up-to-date information right now. But, all I can say that we will defend our country and we are not scared.
Meanwhile, these images show people in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, taking shelter in Naukova metro station from Russian airstrikes, as seen here. Here's an upsound of an audio of a man speaking in Malayalam language. He said there are some Malayalis here and there are some Nigerians and other nationalities. And he said nobody knew there would be a curfew. It's dark scenes here from 10 p.m. to morning of 7 a.m. We have to be here. There is no place for us to charge our phones or even a power bank. And there are some Ukrainians here with small children as well. And scares of conflicts in Ukraine have sent many Polish living close to the border to long queues at gas stations, fearing there will soon be a shortage. Poland, which has a lengthy border with Ukraine and is already home to an estimated 1.5 million of its citizens, has expressed steadfast support for the country to its east and a willingness to help. The first Ukraine refugees have begun to trickle into Hungary and Romania, while the United Nations said 100,000 had been displaced by the fighting. Ukrainians are seeking shelter inside Kiev's Soloti-Vorota metro station, as Ukrainian forces fight off Russian invaders in the streets of the capital. President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Moscow of targeting civilians and has called for more international sanctions. And we have more news for you when we come back. Please stay tuned.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa new era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome to Mobile Legends!
Nakikiusap po ako! Maawa ka po sa kanya!
Hindi ako maawa!
Bakit ba? Lahat na lang nasabihin namin ay kinukontra mo!
Ako, si Contraman!
Mga kasama, ito ng mga dokumento. Kailangan nating lagdaan yan. Gamit ang ating mga dugo.
Kailangan ba talagang dugo?
Dugo!
Pwede ka chwekin na lang.
Ang ating pong game ngayon ay pagalingan sa Tinikling!
Protesters turned out on public squares and outside Russian embassies in cities from different parts of the world to denounce the invasion of Ukraine. Let's listen in.
3,
I was shocked. I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't believe my eyes what I was seeing. I got probably 50 messages from my friends, from my relatives who are still in Ukraine, and I couldn't believe it.
It's very difficult news, very hard news. I almost couldn't fall asleep, and it's just unbelievable that it's 21st century and it's happening and nobody's actually doing anything. They should stop it, and now this huge country with monster in charge just bombing Ukrainian cities.
The earliest known protest occurred outside Russia's embassy in Washington, D.C.
Scary when you feel that you can't really do anything, you know. We are trying to do something, our part here.
Now, the earliest known protest occurred outside Russia's embassy in Washington around 1 a.m. on Thursday, only 3 hours after President Vladimir Putin said he had launched his military operation. Meanwhile, Russian police have detained almost 1,400 people at anti-war protests across Russia after President Putin sent troops to invade Ukraine. More than 1,391 people have already been detained in 51 cities. That according to OVD Info, which tracks arrests at opposition rallies. More than 700 people have been detained in Moscow, over 340 in the second largest city, St. Petersburg. That according to the Monitor. Earlier, Russian authorities have warned anti-war sympathizers from gathering, threatening Russians with legal repercussions for joining unsanctioned protests related to the tense foreign political situation. Meanwhile, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, expressed her deep alarm about the Russian Federation military attack against Ukraine, according to her spokesperson. In a recorded message, UN Human Rights Office spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani said civilians in various parts of Ukraine were awoken by the sounds of heavy bombardment and are terrified of further escalation, with many fleeing their homes. Take a look.
This military action clearly violates international law and puts at risk countless civilian lives. It must be immediately halted. States that fail to take all reasonable measures to settle their international disputes by peaceful means fall short of complying with their obligation to protect the right to life. Reports have emerged of military strikes near major cities with significant populations, including Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Odessa, Mariupol, and the capital of Kiev. The protection of the civilian population must be a priority. The use of explosive weapons in populated areas should, at all costs, be avoided. The High Commissioner calls for full respect for international humanitarian law, in particular the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949 and its first additional protocol of 1977, as well as international human rights law. An information war is also underway, and it is particularly crucial at this time that we continue to closely monitor and attempt to verify reports of human rights violations. And this includes civilian casualties, damage to civilian objects, including critical infrastructure, and other impact on the human rights on the ground. Our UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission remains in the country and will continue to closely monitor and report on the situation.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky Friday called on Europeans with combat experience to fight for Ukraine as invading Russian forces threatened Kiev. The 44-year-old leader also said the West was in no hurry to help Ukraine against the Russian invasion. He said, "How are you going to defend yourself when you are so slowly helping us in Ukraine?" State institutions, he said, in Europe are not in a hurry with really strong decisions. Western countries have imposed sanctions on Moscow, but stopped short of cutting Russia off from the SWIFT international payment system. Zelensky demanded that Europe go further and act without delay. And here are some images. A train carrying Ukrainians fleeing Kiev Arriving in Poland as clashes erupted inside Ukraine's capital. For the first time amid rising fears the city is about to be stormed or come under siege. Air travel is no longer an option as the Western airlines are completely avoiding the country's airspace, and Kiev's international airport was reportedly one of the first targets of Russian airstrikes. Now, some people walked on foot, wheeling their possessions in suitcases across the border into Poland and Hungary. UN aid agencies said that fuel, cash, and medical supplies are running low in parts of Ukraine, which could drive up to 5 million people to flee abroad. At least 100,000 people have already fled their homes. Several thousand have crossed into neighboring countries, including Moldova, Romania, and Poland, according to UN Refugee Agency spokesperson Shabia Mantu in Geneva. And here's an update. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the aim of the operation was openly declared demilitarization and denazification as Russian invading forces approached Kiev on the second day of the Kremlin's attack. And let's listen to him.
Цель операции объявлена открыто – демилитаризация и денацификация, потому что мы хотим, чтобы украинский народ, или, как сказал президент Путин, все народы, проживающие на территории современной Украины, имели возможность свободно, без попыток загонять их в тиски бендеровской психологии, определить свою будущую судьбу. Россия обеспечит...
Now, Mr. Lavrov said Moscow was ready for talks with Kiev if the Ukrainian army surrenders. He also denied Ukrainian claims that Russian forces had hit civilian infrastructure despite widespread evidence of residential areas being damaged, as you can see here. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced he was launching a major military operation in Ukraine in the early hours of Thursday. Western countries have imposed a barrage of international sanctions against Russia since then. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping said he supported solving the Ukraine crisis through talks in a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to state media, after Moscow launched an invasion of its neighbor. In a readout of the call on state broadcaster CCTV, President Xi pointed out that the situation in eastern Ukraine has undergone rapid changes, and China supports Russia and Ukraine to resolve the issue through negotiation. Beijing has trod a cautious diplomatic line on the crisis and refused to call it an invasion or condemn the actions of Russia, its close ally. President Xi said on the call with President Putin it was important to abandon the Cold War mentality, attach importance to and respect the reasonable security concerns of all countries, and form a balanced, effective, and sustainable European security mechanism through negotiations. According to the Chinese media readout, President Putin outlined the reasons for Russia launching the special military operation and told President Xi that NATO and the United States had long ignored Russia's reasonable security concerns. He also told President Xi on the call that Russia was ready to hold high-level talks with Ukraine. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Pangongolekta ng sentimo ng isang ina para sa anak na may sakit sa atay, nerespondihan. Mga volunteer riders na force multiplier na nagbibigay pa ng ayuda ngayong pandemya, ating sinundan. Responde at PhilHealth nagsanib puwersa sa pagbibigay ng libreng serbisyo. At vlogger na ginawa ng content ang pagtulong sa mga nangangailangan, atin po silang kilalanin. Sabado, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi. Ito ang Responde, Mata ng Mamamayan.
Ngayong linggo, itigil muna ang mga gawaing bahay at manood ng Tara Game agad-agad kasama ang mga mahal nating Tara Gamers na kasambahay. So pag nakuha mo yung 100,000, anong unang-unang mong gagawin?
Papagamot ko po yung tatay ko. Mayroon po akong pinapaaral ng mga anak. 3 po sila.
Isa kaya sa kanila ay maswerteng mag-uuwi ng 100,000 pesos? Alas 7 ng gabi, dito lang sa Net 25.
Bida sa pelikula, sa commercials, sa game shows, sa puso mo. Pero ngayon, kayo naman ang bibida dito. Soon on Net 25.
Araw-araw may bagong kaalaman. Dahil sa Tony Knows, everybody knows! Your Kuya Tony Petgaba na hindi naubusan ng tips. Siyempre, from DIY to life hacks, sagot ko na yan. Saan ka pa? Let's all play together. Let's have fun together. Tara na, sumali at makigulo sa aming kada challenge. Sa kada umaga, kompleto na ang inyong umaga.
Ang mga pinakamaiinit na issue, pangyayaring nakakaapekto sa lipunan, mga kaganapan sa politika, tatalakayin, lilinawin dito sa Saganang Mamamayan. Kasama si Jenso Barjaga.
Iba't ibang klase ng gamot na kung tawagin natin ay OTC.
Nelson Lubao.
Ay hindi mo na kailangan magreseta.
At mga espesyal na co-host, Senator Francis Tolentino.
Ano po yung ginagawa ngayon, yung kabalita hakbangin ng COMELEC?
Tourism Advocate Bobby Joseph.
We can get around 12 to 15% of GDP.
At ang tinaguriang pambansang basurero, Benny Antiporta.
Tinulungan po sila ng ating Pangulo, binigyan ng lupa, yung mga IT.
Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 10 hanggang alas 11 ng umaga, Saganang Mamamayan.
Welcome back. Organizers of the Mobile World Congress said there would be no Russian pavilion at the world's biggest telecoms fair next week in Barcelona due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The GSMA Industry Association, which stages the annual event, said in a statement it energetically condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In light of this emerging situation and considering the tragic loss of life, MWC seems immaterial under the circumstances. The GSMA is complying with all sanctions and government policies resulting from this situation. Therefore, there will be no Russian pavilion at the MWC22. About a dozen Russian firms were set to be part of the Russian pavilion at the 4-day event, which gets underway on Monday in Barcelona in northeastern Spain. These firms can still take part in the fair, but they will not be grouped together in their own pavilion. Organizers expect 40,000 to 60,000 people will attend the event, which will feature more than 1,500 exhibitors from 150 countries. The show, a key event for showcasing new technologies, had been canceled at the last minute in 2020 after multiple companies withdrew as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. An IAG owner of British Airways and Spanish carrier Iberia is rerouting aircraft to avoid flying over Russian airspace, its boss said Friday amid international outcry over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Chief Executive Luis Gallego told reporters in a call that IAG was rerouting flights so as not to fly over Russia and canceled a Moscow-bound flight. The news came one day after the UK government banned a Russian flagship carrier Aeroflot from flying over Britain as part of a series of sanctions against Russia following its invasion of neighbor Ukraine. The airline conglomerate was also rerouting scheduled flights to Singapore and Dubai so that they do not fly over Russia. Separately, IAG revealed Friday that net losses more than halved last year with recovery underway as COVID travel curbs were lifted. Hong Kong's prisons on Friday reported a worsening coronavirus outbreak involving more than 200 inmates at a time when hundreds of political activists and protesters are behind bars. The city is in the throes of its worst ever COVID-19 wave, registering thousands of cases every day that are overwhelming hospitals and government efforts to isolate infected people. The outbreak, fueled by the extremely transmissible Omicron variant, has also breached the city's prisons, where more than 7,200 people are currently detained. As of Thursday, there were 202 confirmed infections and 135 preliminary positive prisoners within the system, a caseload that has grown by more than 20 times in about a week. Visits have been suspended since the beginning of February, while one correctional facility has been converted to isolate infected prisoners. In recent years, newcomers to Hong Kong's prison system have included many of the city's most prominent democracy activists, ensnared in the wake of the 2019 massive and at times violent democracy protests. And at least 7 people died when a 6.2 magnitude earthquake rocked Indonesia's Sumatra Island on Friday, with residents shuttling loved ones to safety as buildings crumbled around them. Take a look.
Kondisi rumah seperti apa? Kondisi rumahnya rata-rata tidak layak huni lagi, Pak, karena udah rusak ya. Rusak berat? Rusak berat lah. Yang dibutuhkan sekarang apa nih, Pak? Yang butuhkan sekarang kami butuhkan tenda, dapur umum, sama pakaian-pakaian.
Now, the quake hit the island's north at a depth of 12 kilometers, about 70 kilometers from the town of Bukit Tinggi in West Sumatra province, according to the United States Geological Survey. Indonesia's meteorological agency, BMKG, warned people to stay away from slopes over fears of landslides at the peak of the rainy season. The quake was felt in the neighboring provinces of Riau and North Sumatra, and as far away as Malaysia and Singapore. No tsunami warning has been issued. Images shared with AFP from Pasaman City near the quake's epicenter showed partially collapsed houses with bricks lying on the ground, holes in the walls. The town's mayor residents also suffered damage, with glass shattered all over the floor. According to Surayanto, television footage showed patients being wheeled out of a hospital in West Sumatra's provincial capital, Padang. Tremors were also felt in Singapore, according to witnesses and police. Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, causing it to experience frequent earthquakes. In 2004, a 9.1 magnitude quake struck the coast of Sumatra and triggered a tsunami that killed 220,000 people throughout the region, including about 170,000 in Indonesia. And we'll be back with more news right after this break. Stay tuned.
Gusto niyo bang magkaroon ng tsansang manalo ng 5,000 pesos na nasa bahay lang kayo? Manood lang ng Tara Game agad-agad mula simula hanggang katapusan para makuha ang mga sagot sa dalawang Tara Game questions of the night. Magpunta lang sa www.net25.com, pindutin ang Tara Game Sagot Agad-agad logo, mag-register at isubmit ang mga sagot mo para magkaroon ka ng entry. Ang dali lang! Natuwa ka na, posible ka pang manalo ng 5,000 pesos. Ang dali lang nito. O ano, sali na sa Tara Game Sagot agad-agad promo!
And Paris will host this season's Champions League final after St. Petersburg was stripped of the match due to Russia's military invasion of Ukraine, according to UEFA announcing this today. The showpiece occasion of the European club season will be played at the Stade de France on Saturday, May 28, according to European football's governing body, after holding an emergency meeting in response to the crisis. UEFA wishes to express its thanks and appreciation to French Republic President Emmanuel Macron for his personal support and commitment to have European club football's most prestigious game moved to France at a time of unparalleled crisis, according to their statement. The Russian government responded by calling the decision by UEFA a shame. It is a shame, it said, that such a decision was made. This according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He said St. Petersburg could have provided the best possible conditions for holding this football event, unquote. The final was supposed to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg, which already hosted several matches at last year's European Championship and at the 2018 World Cup held in Russia. Meanwhile, the mayor of Kiev and former boxer Vitaly Klitschko addressed the people of Ukraine about the tragedy of Russia's invasion, while his brother, Vladimir Klitschko, appeals to the international partners for help. Take a look.
Дорогі українці, дорогі кияни, те, що зараз зроблено зі сторони Росії, велика трагедія. Трагедія не тільки для України, це трагедія для всієї Європи. Але переконаний в тому, що ми вистоїмо. Вистоїмо і зможемо показати нашу силу і дух.
I'm calling to all the international partners to observe this tragedy that is happening nowadays in Ukraine and this senseless war, which is not going to have any winners but losers. Tell you we must stay united against this aggression, against Russian aggression. Don't let it happen, continue happening in Ukraine, don't let it happening in Europe and eventually in the world. United we're strong. Support Ukraine.
And we'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
Hanggang saan mo ako mamahalin? Hanggang sa pagtanda ba natin ako pa rin ang iibigin? Patuloy mo.
Hello everyone, my name is JC Dumincel. Please catch me on Letters and Music on air and online this coming Sunday, February 27. Dito lang po yan sa Net 25. See ya!
Welcome back. INC members in Southern Ontario continue their church activities under strict COVID rules. Maria Revalo reports.
While we all hope that this COVID pandemic could begin pivoting to an endemic stage, the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ here in Southern Ontario, Canada, continues to share their faith with their fellow men.
Whatever situation may be, despite of this pandemic, we will show 100% participation in all the works of the church, especially in the works of propagation.
The province of Ontario here in Canada has mandated that religious gatherings and services, ceremonies and rites, such as baptisms, are permitted within places of worship with certain restrictions on capacity.
Despite the pandemic situation, the members of the Church of Christ here in the District of Southern Ontario will be baptizing a total of 11 new members as a result of the active propagation of their faith. This is the second baptism to be held since the beginning of the new year.
Come out to the Church of Christ. Hear what they have to say. learn the truth about God, listen to the doctrine, go to the worship services, and hear the truth, and understand that we belong in the Church of Christ for salvation.
In compliance with the public health recommendations and Ontario regulations, the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ continues to plan and conduct baptisms, strictly following the safety protocols of the city government to help stop the spread of the virus.
Oh, it's very, very special feelings, and I'm very happy I'm here to do that.
Although we continue to see an overall decrease in the number of cases in the region, the virus is still here. As the province of Ontario began to lift restrictions, the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ here in Southern Ontario will continue to comply with public health guidelines, including those for religious gatherings such as baptisms, in order to protect the progress the community have made over the last few years of this global pandemic. For Eagle News Service, reporting from Southern Ontario, Canada, this is Maria Revelo, your Canada Bureau. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Maria. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.